Hi everyone, I am Alex Brown, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about chapter 7 of Skinner's book about behaviorism. This chapter is on thinking. So, to begin this chapter, Skinner mentioned that thinking is behaving, but it usually means behaving weakly. So, for example, thinking a certain animal that you see in the distance is a dog would be weaker than knowing that that animal is a dog. Another example would be saying that you think you will clean your room later versus saying you know you will clean your room later. Skinner mentions a few examples of mistakenly allocating behavior to the mind. So he says that all of these things are behavior, but often they're mistaken for the mind doing them. So they are the cognitive control of stimuli, search and recall, solving problems, choice, creative behavior, the structure of the mind, and the thinking mind. So I'll talk a little bit more about each one of those. The cognitive control of stimuli. So Skinner says that it's wrong to say that perception is a process of taking possession of the world. He says that we cannot take possession of the world, but instead we can act on our environment. So he would say that it's wrong to say that we are seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting, because those would require us to take possession of the world. So he would say that we should actually be saying things like we are looking at, or we're listening to, or sniffing, or savoring. And he says that we can also reduce certain stimuli by acting. So an example of doing that would be if you're listening to music and it's just way too loud, so you cover your ears so that it reduces that stimuli. He also says that discrimination is a behavioral process. It's not a cognitive process. So we do this by noticing differences in our environment. So those contingencies are what allow us to make discriminations. It's not the mind that's allowing us to do that. He says that reinforcement teaches us concepts. It's not the cognitive processes. And he says that stimulus control is based off of our history of reinforcement. Search and recall. So he says that both of these things are behaviors. They're not cognitive activities. To search for something would mean that we're acting in a way that previously has been reinforced. So meaning that item that we found and how we found it in the past, we're going to do those same kind of behaviors to find it now. So if you lost your keys before, and then you ended up finding your keys in your coat pocket, then you might do the same thing. If you lose your keys again and you need to find them, you're probably going to be checking your coat pockets, maybe checking your pants pockets, just doing those behaviors that were reinforced in the past. So that would be searching. And recall, he mentions, it's also not a cognitive process. He says to recall something would require a prompt, strengthened behavior. He mentions that mnemonics are easily learned behaviors that can prompt behavior to be recalled. So an example of a mnemonic is Roy G. Biv. So to remember the colors of the rainbow, that R would stand for red, and then the O for orange, Y for yellow. So that's an example of a mnemonic that we used for recall. And he says we can even prompt ourselves sometimes to recall information. So I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I know I personally am just really terrible at remembering people's names. So oftentimes, if I'm trying to recall someone's name, I might go through the alphabet. So inside my head, I'll say A, B, C, D. And so like, let's say their name was Steve. So once I get to S, oftentimes that'll prompt me to recall that his name is Steve. Solving problems. So Skinner says that problems arise when there's a possibility of reinforcement, but we don't know how to act to obtain that reinforcement. So to solve problems, he would say that we would need to admit a certain response. So he says it's not a cognitive process. It's really just us admitting the right response, and that's what solves problems. Choice. So there are multiple ways that we can make a decision or choose, according to Skinner. Reviewing our past personal experience is an example. Also, researching facts is an example of behaviors that we do to choose when needed. And creative behavior, he relates creative behavior to genetic mutations or accidents that occur in the evolutionary theory. And so he says that accidents can also occur in regards to behavior. So not all of our behavior is based off of past experiences. Sometimes it's just kind of an accident. And so he says that some behaviors are omitted even though they in the past have never been reinforced. So in that individual's whole history of reinforcement, operant learning, it's never been reinforced. So an example would be a person playing a piano and they hit the wrong note or key. That would actually, and it actually ends up sounding better than the right note. That's kind of an example of creative behavior. So kind of either accidentally or purposely trying something totally new. And the structure of the mind. So the process of thinking is a behavior, according to Skinner. And the factors that play a role in thinking are genetic and personal histories. The thinking mind. So a lot of times we hear people use the term the mind, but Skinner says that actually we should be substituting brain for mind. So an example, if someone's saying that the mind is the location where thinking takes place, Skinner would actually say that it's actually the brain that is the location where thinking takes place, and also that the brain does the thinking. It's not the mind that does the thinking, it's the brain that does the thinking. And he says that the brain stores and processes data, it's not the mind, and that human thought is human behavior. So just some final thoughts for you guys to start this discussion up. I am curious to know who, if anyone else has, after reading this chapter, if you've tried to make a conscious effort in replacing all these commonly used mentalistic terms in your vocabulary when you're giving an explanation as to why you did what you did, or stuff like that. I know I've been trying to, but I've found that it's very difficult. So I'm interested to know if you guys have had similar experiences, or if you just kind of are like, nope, I'm not going to change the way I talk. I've been talking this way since I was born, or not since I was born, but soon after I was born, most likely. So I'm curious to know if you guys have tried to make any changes in your vocab. And also, do you agree 100% with Skinner's view of radical behaviorism? And if not, what mentalistic, methodological, or structuralist views do you agree more with? So I'd like to talk about those with you guys. And of course, have to include the references page to Skinner's book about behaviorism. All right, well, I hope to hear from you guys soon. Thanks.